everyone. So I'm Glyn Povah from Telefonica, and we're going to talk about authentication for the next 30 minutes, carrying on the theme that Andrew kindly started. And I'd like to thank Andrew for a great, seamless user experience at the Eurostar terminal the other day. It worked seamlessly, and I was very grateful for that. But I guess we're going to, on this panel, talk about authentication from a more telco perspective, bringing it back to home to kind of, the way many of us authenticate ourselves today, with some simpler methods or simpler mechanisms like SMS one-time passcodes that we're probably all familiar with. I'm joined today by Adam, who's the product director at Twilio, from Tim, who is a number of information services VP at XConnect, and also from Harsha, who's here joining us from Sinch as a product manager, senior solution expert. Myself, I look after digital identity in Telefonica on a global level, and we've been building out digital identity APIs for relying parties together with channel partners, many of whom are here today, for about the last 7 or 8 years. And of course, probably you've heard that APIs is a really big theme for telcos at the moment. I'm sure we'll touch upon that this afternoon. But I wanted to share a few trends to get started before getting the panel to kind of comment and discuss a little bit. That will hopefully flow through this panel, but also more widely during the afternoon in other sessions. Trends, at least that I'm seeing, either in a UK, European, or global sense, around some of those more simple authentication methods, and particularly related to telco products, which is voice and messaging. Predominantly SMS and predominantly voice calls on your mobile phone. Now, I think one of the interesting things, I was talking to one of the senior fraud VPs in one of the UK banks the other day, and we were talking about the scams that are happening, the voice social engineering scams, or APP fraud as it's known in the UK, which is a really big growing problem. And we were talking about the future of how communications looks for this bank, sort of 5 years out. I think, I was pretty surprised, maybe let's say, to hear this bank say it was their stated strategy to effectively stop using mobile operator channels, to stop using social media channels, to stop using any communications channels that they did not control directly themselves. Now, that's a pretty ambitious strategy, and it's not, it's not that they're not outsourcing capabilities. They'd be outsourcing comms probably to AWS in this case. So they do have technology providers, it's just not the ones they have today. And we're talking about this bank and all the others in the UK that are sending millions and millions of one-time passcodes every day. They're still using the username and password for logins, and they're using biometrics as a strong authentication method as well on their mobile apps. But I think it does hint at maybe a different future if some of us involved in telecommunications don't kind of address some of the challenges we have in our market. And maybe it's a great call to action for all of us to actually build new capabilities that maybe we don't have today, or reinforce ones we do have today, so that actually we can still play part of that mix for not just banks, but any relying party in the future. Another trend from another part of the world you may or may not be familiar with, in Singapore, the government is legislating around liability. So if you think about whose fault is it for some of these scams that are happening, a lot of the financial services business, they have to pay out to the victims, sometimes huge amounts of money, and certainly in the UK, an APP fraud is around half a billion pounds last year, so significant losses to the banks. And actually, the Singapore government is talking about making the telcos jointly liable, where they can be proven to have let phishing scams through their SMS gateways. That's quite a change in mood, I think, and sentiment for the telcos, certainly. But just we need to think about that, I guess, on a more global perspective, about how we can make sure we put preventions in place so that doesn't become the norm, on a global perspective. SMS OTP, I'm sure will come up on this panel and maybe others. It's something we're all familiar with. It's a possession factor using our phones to receive a passcode that we can then put into the mobile app or the website, so we can prove that we are who we say we are. And that is really, I think, the crux of this authentication, is proving that we are who we say we are in a digital way is much harder than it is in a physical sense. And so, how are we as telcos going to make sure that SMS can still be there and relevant? Because we have to remember that is not all about people who adopt technology. We have to think about people who don't adopt technology, and we don't want to have people left behind. And I think that goes back to my point about, you know, the director at the bank who was talking about fraud and his desire to have full control within the mobile app of all his communications and not communicate with customers outside the mobile app. In other words, he said to me, you know, if you call me or text me, I'm going to assume you're a fraudster. But you know, we have to think about people who get left behind by that. And actually, you know, I think all brands need to make sure they offer ways to communicate with their customers that work for them. And some will be more secure, more subject to fraud than others, of course. And I guess finally, before kind of asking the panel to comment on some of these themes, you might have heard from Google last week. They're launching a voice scam call capability as part of their Gemini Nano AI capability in their mobile phones. So everything's going to be on device, but Google's going to offer the ability to alert you to a scam coming into your phone using their AI on device. So they'll be listening to your call and listening and transcribing the content of the call. So that's, you know, quite scary for privacy advocates probably. And it'll alert you if it picks up that some of that context or some of that voice call information is looking like a scam. It's an opt-in service, so I think, you know, that's a good start. But we need to think about, you know, how this is going to work in the real world with real consumers. You know, when we've got these new AI technologies coming in. So with that, I guess, you know, one of the things I'd like to explore a bit with the panel is kind of the human and the consumer perspective of authentication. You know, we are all consumers as much as we are business people as well. You know, how do we feel about, you know, authentication today? Do we think it's even broken? Are we happy with usernames and passwords, or is there a better future out there beyond SMS one-time passcodes and usernames and passwords? Maybe Adam, you want to kick us off on that?
Sure. I mean, I can say just human behavior in general is that they're apathetic towards security. I mean, if you think about the whole problem with username and passwords, is that people would take the same username and password and they would replicate it across sites, right? Because it's very difficult to remember the 270 sites on average that people have interactions with. And so, you know, like 15 years ago when we started to get into two-factor authentication, we take a look at, well, what technologies are available where people don't have to do anything. They don't have to download anything on their phone. It's ubiquitous. And SMS was the thing. And so that's why mobile operators were kind of front and center in providing that security network, because it was very consumer friendly. The user didn't have to do anything for it. A lot of the new technologies that are coming around you have a mixture. They're really great from a user, you know, basically they happen in the background, or a lot of these things like don't require a lot of user intervention, but they're not ubiquitous. Like you need them to download, or you need them to opt in, or things like that. So I think that there's still, there's going to be a lot of need for kind of these older technologies that have been tried and true. Unfortunately, they're not really sexy anymore. A lot of people always talk about the death of SMS OTPs. I think that they're going to be needed as a fallback mechanism because these new technologies don't fit everywhere.
Tim, what's your perspective on the consumer adoption of existing and new technologies?
Sure, I think I'd add a little on top of that, and almost taking it a layer away from just the OTP as the mechanism to actually just talk about telephone numbers. You know, I think, you know, the telephone number, 145 years, I think we've been using numbers for phones. So it's got a lot of legacy, and it's got a lot of history, and it's got a lot of network acceptance. It's also got absolute ubiquity. You know, basically, pretty much everyone has a phone number that they're aware of or that they're using. Shouldn't generalize too much on that, but pretty much. And that means that it is exactly as we've talked about here. It's ready to use, it's available, and there's a lot of experience with it, and also that means a lot of trust. Now, I think, you know, we've seen in this last, I don't know, maybe only 5 years, that trust being rather broken by the types of scams that have been coming back. So it seems to me the initiatives to actually rebuild something or put straight that trust in something which is just, it's not fundamentally broken, it's just a bit abused. When something is abused, it's good to prop it up and make sure that it's then being correctly used and applying some new technologies maybe to make sure that we can use this mechanism that actually has worked extremely well. So in my mind, that very much supports the view of, OTPs, they're right there, they're right in front of you, they're incredibly easy to use, they're well accepted, pretty well understood. You see a number come up and you know what to do with it. I know we've learned that. It's only probably less than that, 5-year learning, but it's there. So I do think we've got to rebuild that trust, and there's some technologies need to be applied, but the phone number still works beautifully. It has that universality that I think works for us all.
I'll add one more point to what you just said, which is the age at which people get a phone number now is, it keeps on creeping down year after year. So the fact that you are able to identify more people with a phone number, it used to be 18 plus, now, it's getting into the 13. Unfortunately, a lot of parents are enabling kids even younger than that to have phone numbers. So, yeah.
Yeah, and then I think talking about ubiquity, I guess my question would be, are we ever going to get to the same ubiquity as phone number? 6-7 billion people who have any kind of device, whether it's a smartphone or a feature phone, anyone can use that to authenticate themselves with SMS today. We're looking at, biometrics. I think it's got a great start. Certainly, it's available on many laptops, desktops, and smartphones. Other things like passkeys that are coming along, they're really going with big ambition to actually own the authentication space. But I think, as telcos, we always talk about, going back to, doing what we do best, which is understanding the SIM card, authenticating the SIM card in our network, and using that really as a root of trust in the same way that the mobile device can be a root of trust, going back to my banking example, where they want to use the device which has been verified and onboarded the customer. That is then a root of trust until it gets lost or stolen or some other thing happens to it. The SIM card gets swapped maybe. So I think really that's the key for me, I think. Harsha, what do you think about?
I think the main thing that enterprise are looking for alternatives is driven by the price. So in some markets, SMS is very pricey compared to WhatsApp 10 times, right? So that drives away from them to look for alternative. I think that's the biggest problem. The second thing is the fraud happening in the OTP space, like artificial inflation of traffic, then the grey route, SIM farms, and all these things, right? So that trust is eroded from the OTP channel. But then there are other new things emerging from the mobile area. For example, we call data verification, silent mobile verification, right? Which use the mobile data session to authenticate the user, because most frauds happen because the end user is part of the process, verification process, right? So in this case, we are doing that in the back end. Then I think the consent and other things comes into the discussion. But I think that are some of the concerns enterprise have, like user experience and the security concerns. Then I think the RCS and RBM is making a lot of noise with Apple's announcement, right? So that will also help to some extent, because it, in a way, it's brand verified, right? So in the RBM, it's a brand is verified, and it will cut down the middle players, and it's the very few layers between brand and the subscriber. That open up, less risk for the kind of fraud that can happen. And also it's an encrypted channel. I think those are the opportunities that operators need to capitalize on.
Right.
And we talk about digital wallets kind of service all morning, and the passkey is out there. Of course, there will be good things in those things, but it will take some time to adapt, right? So I think the developers will be the game changers. So how fast they can adapt these new technologies. I think we are in a fragmented identity market, so it's a huge market. So I think both evolutionary and revolutionary techniques will stay. I think operators need to get the price right, and also the consent is more important. Especially they open up additional service like they have a lot of data in their CRM. They can open it and monetize. That's all about GSM Open Gateway and this Camara thing about, right? But we need to concern about the user consent.
Yeah, sure.
Can I just say actually one thing about the passkeys? I think a lot of the new technologies that are being developed now are developed by people in different generations than are kind of the new up and coming. So passkeys had a gap in that you couldn't use one device, one trusted device to go and attest to another one. Now you can with passkeys.
Yeah.
But when you look at the behavior of younger generations, I mean, for like our generation, you have a work computer, you have a personal computer, you have a smartphone, you probably have a tablet. Like there's a lot of devices that you can use for attestation. For younger people, they may have a work computer, but their only other device they have is their phone. That's it. And they don't use their work personality in order to attest their identity. And so I think that a lot of the workarounds that we're doing for authentication tied to a single device have a problem associated with whenever you lose that device or whenever you need to do natural things like upgrade a device, it's not going to be conducive to like what the younger generation patterns do. I think that unfortunately our generation are building technologies that maybe aren't.
Watch out, don't look at me.
Yeah, no, that's right.
I'm the oldest on the sorry.
I think that comes back to the point about inclusivity. We need to make sure that we're not just designing technology for certain generations. And okay, we can all have our wallets, our digital wallets, and our credentials and our verifiable credentials and everything else. But we don't want to leave people behind, and we want to make sure that even if SMS becomes legacy in 10 years' time, that actually it's still available as a fallback, and it's actually more secure than it is today. So we build products out there so we can have security. The seamless authentication Harsha talked about is something the telcos are promoting very strongly right now, number verify. You've probably heard about the ability to effectively verify a SIM card by the phone number without the customer being involved. So you can do that directly with the telco network or via various different channel partners. That's a really powerful new capability that the telcos have built. It's rolled out now on more than 200 telcos globally. And we're investing heavily in things like Open Gateway and Kamara APIs to make sure that we actually really speed up the pace of innovation that perhaps has been a little bit slow in the telco community for a little while now. We actually speed up that pace of innovation and do kind of inside-out innovation. So let people build stuff on top of our networks, but obviously still keep them secure as they have been for 20 years since the advent of GSMA. I mean, we're running down in the last minutes now, but I think it'd be good to cover just one last topic. And I know we've got another session on RCS and RBM and verified sender. So thanks for raising that, Harsha. So we can cover that in a little more detail in the following session. But artificial intelligence, that's coming fast at us now, both from the fraud community, in other words, the fraudsters and the scammers, but also as a way of defending against those guys. From an authentication perspective, in terms of what we have today or what we might have in the future, how do you guys see that playing out in the next few years?
I mean, one comment I have is it's not actually very difficult to fool us. Most of us are, whether you're sort of weaker or you need protecting or whatever, or whether you're just slightly careless. It's incredibly. So I was looking at Andrew's presentation earlier on, and obviously you're looking at the very high end, but what it really comes down to is, do you recognize, have you got everything you need to recognize that particular person? And that AI seems like a horrendous threat. You then, all right, we started talking about telephone numbers. Actually, you can get really, really simple with telephone numbers. Has it got the right number of digits? Does it exist? Right, those are two really basic questions. I don't need AI for that. I just need to know the answer. I just need data to know that kind of thing. And huge amounts of fraud are being prevented by very, very simple checks like that. When I look at the threat of AI in this sort of risk environment, I'm actually less bothered by the clever misrepresentation. I'm more bothered by the ability to target the people who are susceptible. So when I look at some of the major, like the iSpoof fraud, which was talked about at one of the previous MEF meetings by Interpol, what was very clear there was they were just targeting lots and lots and lots and lots of people with very, very simple script-driven, no AI involved, just a very simple text-written script to try and fool someone into doing something stupid. And the real issue there was targeting, finding the people who were willing to fall for it or didn't recognize the problem. The same goes for things like the people doing very large financial transactions and being told, oh, please just send this money to this different account. You get a text that says, send this money to a different account about 10 minutes before you're about to sell your house. That has been a massive case of fraud. Now, again, that's all about targeting the right person, the person who's just about to sell their house and you know the name of the lawyers. That's all you need to know. That doesn't require huge amounts of intelligence. So I still feel the real issue here is more about education and making sure that the dumb stuff doesn't happen. Now, okay, we've got the really complex high-end frauds as well, but you've got to cover the bottom end as well. And I think that's a very important thing to consider. Don't think either AI is necessary or the cause. It opens up a whole new space, but it's not really where a lot of the fraud today actually lies.
I think what Tim is saying is that the user to business use case, I think where people are like fraudsters are using AI to fool businesses. There's technology like iProve that can go and help out with that. The real issue is the person-to-person fraud, right? It's the social engineering of individuals. All of us don't have the resources to deploy an iProve like as an individual, right? Luckily, Google, right, is coming out with something to kind of defend on our behalf, but we have to be okay with having Google listen to our voice calls. So the question is there any kind of intermediary software or any companies that can step up on behalf of the user, and as a user, are we willing to pay for that? Because frankly, it's gonna take some money.
Yeah, I think my perspective is it's a threat as well as an opportunity, right? So we need to make sure that we invest on defensive AI to stay ahead of the fraudsters, the one thing, and then the regulation and other things need to be there to make sure that ethical use of the AI. And I think information sharing and collaboration is more important. And yeah, I think it's more about stay ahead of the fraudsters to in the game. So yeah.
Yeah, well, I think we're going to see an arms race, aren't we, in artificial intelligence about who's got the most resources and finances to actually either target the brands and the consumers, or vice versa, to defend against the fraudsters. So unfortunately, it will probably be a bit of an arms race, as many other things have proven in the past. So with that, I think we need to wrap up. Have we got time for questions?
We have, actually.
Fabulous. Any questions for the panel?
That was for us speaking.
Could you still say your name?
Hi, Ellie Katz, XConnect. You mentioned, Glyn, very clearly at the beginning all about the issues of restoring trust, both on the voice side and on the messaging side. I think perhaps it's just worth giving a 1-minute summary of efforts going on by the industry as we speak now. Certainly on the telecom side, there's an industry organisation called the i3 Forum, which has been launching a effort on a global basis called One Consortium, working with regulators and industry around the world, specifically to address this issue of restoring trust. It's a fundamental pillar that is the basis for, as Tim was mentioning, all about phone numbers, and the more we can ensure and restore the trust on phone numbers, the better. So just basically a comment of, is this something which you think is a necessary step, and is this something which you think is going forward an important way to help address this?
Thanks, Ellie. So yeah, I mean, Telefonica is an enthusiastic supporter of the i3 Forum and One Consortium, and we want to see more trust brought back into telecommunications, and we're investing a lot of efforts to do that. But I think it is about finding mechanisms to help people prove that they are who they say they are, and that we build that capability into our networks in an out-of-bound way. I'm a massive enthusiast of out-of-bound. In other words, having the relying party and the consumer be able to join those together without doing it through all the spaghetti we have in our networks, without having to use stir shake and some of these things that have been tried in other markets. That's not going to be successful for us, in my opinion. I don't know if the panel have got any final comments on that topic.
Well, I can only agree with you. I think it's interesting looking at 2FA being used. In other words, almost like an in-band and an out-of-band. You've got a conversation going on, and then you send another attribute via some other mechanism. It really doesn't matter what that other mechanism is, but you're using a secondary mechanism. When someone is making a voice call, well, maybe you need to do the same thing. And by ensuring that you've actually got almost the redundancy in the system to say, yeah, I've got a check and balance here. I'm not just, and it's a bit like, if I meet someone new and I've not any idea who they are or what they are, I'll ask a friend who knows them. I might use LinkedIn to check out, do the people I know this person? Well, that's what needs to happen in the technology as well. It's almost the third-party reference or an alternative reference that says, yep, I like that one, that's okay, good to talk to.
Brilliant. Thanks so much. And then with that, I'd like to thank the panel very much for their insights this afternoon.